Eternals from a planet called Olympia. We came here 7,000 years ago on the Domo, our starship, to protect humans from the deviants. We thought we killed them all 5 centuries ago, but now they're back.
Look, if you don't want to move in with me, you could just say...
Dane, this is serious.
Oh, I know. I'm just still getting over the fact you're not a wizard. I was hoping you could change me into a giraffe. I always wanted to be a giraffe when I was a kid.
It's too bad I can't change sentient beings. You made a very cute giraffe.
Why didn't you guys help fight Thanos? Or any war, or all the other terrible things throughout history?
We were instructed not to interfere in any human conflicts unless deviants are involved.
Why?
If we'd protected humanity from everything for 7,000 years, you'd never have had the chance to develop in the way you were meant to.
But if the deviants were eradicated a long time ago, why are you still here?
We've been waiting to be told we can go home.
So, Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun.
Sprite made that story up when we lived in Athens.
In the 5th century BC? How long were you two together?
5,000 years.
I guess you can call that long term. What happened?
He left. I always thought he'd come back, but he never did. So I moved on.
I'm glad you did.
I'm sorry. I have to go.
Welcome to Superhero Cinephiles Podcast. I'm your host, Barry Constantine, and I'm joined together by one of my co-hosts on another podcast. He co-hosts E for Evolution, examining Grant Morrison's X-Men with me, and he's also a former guest on this show, and that's Patrick Lagua. Pat, how you doing today?
Good. How are you? Hi, everybody.
Doing pretty good. Good to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
So before we jump into the movie, why don't you remind people a little bit more about yourself?
I lifelong comic book fan. I like Perry said, I'm a co-host on Ease for Evolution. I guess I'm a really kind of a X-Men. Well, not kind of, like sort of that's my go-to comic book obsession. But I've dipped my toes quite a bit in Eternals, I guess, since the movie came out. I think I reread that Neil Gaiman run fairly recently, and then I'm a big Kieron Gillen fan as well, and really enjoying his current take on those characters. If y'all haven't read that current run that he's on, you should check it out.
Yeah, before we jump into Eternals, you also host another podcast. You wanted to tell people about
yes. Yeah, so I'm actually on another X-Men related podcast. It's kind of a theme called Krakoan Exports. So it's me and 3 other co-hosts who are currently going through and reviewing, commenting on the current Hickman era. I guess not Hickman era anymore, but the status quo is still around. We have just wrapped up recording. We go through like the Dawn of X trades. I don't know how familiar you all are with how those are collected, but Marvel is sort of releasing this current era and these Dawn of X trades, which collects issues from different series, sort of in a more chronological order by how the events take place. So we just recorded volume 15, then we're doing volume 16 this week. And after that, we're going to tackle 10 of Swords, which will be a 2-part episode because it's a 22-part comic story. So
yeah, it's pretty big. Me as a trade reader, those Dawn of X trades, they threw me off when I first started dipping into the Hickman stuff, because I picked up the House of X Powers of 10 trade, and then I started picking up the individual trades like X-Men and Marauders. And then after that, I noticed the Dawn of X, these big collections. I'm like, man, maybe I should have gotten those instead and just waited. But we had the guys from the Ex-Wife podcast on here, and they pointed out that it actually is kind of better to do the individual books, because then you can kind of pick and choose which ones you want to do, which has been good, because there's some of the the Hickman era stuff that didn't quite appeal to me. Like I tried the first 2 New Mutants trades and it didn't really grab me all that much, so I kind of skipped out on those. And so it's let me be a little bit more selective in what I want to read.
Yeah, it's really like your flavor of reading.
Mhm.
I don't think I don't think either one is better than the other, though I do think the advantage of the Dawn of X trades is kind of gives you this all-encompassing view, and it really
Right.
shows how well edited and how interlinked all of the stories are. When you
Yeah,
sort of go
it's
through it in a
definite. It's
chronological fashion.
right. Yeah, it's definitely a cool format, and I'm glad that Marvel's giving people the choice of which way they want to read. So that's definitely really, I like that idea. I wish more they do that with more stuff, not only Marvel but DC as well, because trying to piece together things with trades can be kind of a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
But so, like we said, we're going to be talking about Eternals today, and you mentioned a little bit about the Eternals comics. So, like me personally, I've never been a fan of the Eternals. I've never really dipped my toe into their comics. I started reading the Gaiman trade last night actually, because I picked it up years ago, probably on one of the different
Was
sales.
it a sale?
yeah, just like those Comixology sales, which as a side note, I really hate what Amazon's done to Comixology now, but that's a debate for another time.
Another episode, perhaps.
Oh God, I could go on and on. I already wrote an article on Medium about it. But I did pick up this Gaiman trade, and I only just started reading it last night after I rewatched the movie. And it's okay. I think I got like 3 issues left in the trade. But the Eternals as the characters, the concepts, I like Cersei and the Avengers, and my only other real experience in them has been when they appeared in other books. And when they usually appear, it's just kind of, they've never really grabbed my interest at all. But so as someone who's a little bit more familiar with the Eternals comics, what kind of drew you to them?
I guess I don't know if I'm like more familiar than you are, because I can sort of name those two. Those are the two like big, not so, but those are the two main comics exposure I've had to them, is that Gaiman run and the current Gillen run. So I don't know if like,
so you're slightly more experienced than me.
Slightly more, but not
I
too
haven't
much.
read the Gillen run yet.
Yeah. So, but I don't know if that's a function of us being readers, or I don't know if there's ever been wasn't there a Paul Jenkins run at some point, or am I making that up?
Paul Jenkins did.
I think there was.
I think you're.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, you're right. So I don't know if.
I do think there was another. There's obviously the original. There was obviously the original Kirby stuff, and then I think there was another miniseries or something between the Gaiman and the Gillen stuff.
Okay, yeah. So I don't know if like our level of exposure is related more to like how interesting they are to us, or whether there just isn't that much like actual Eternal stuff to read, and I'm not sure what the case is as far as that's concerned.
So you've never read any of the Kirby stuff then?
I have not.
Okay. So
I have not.
So I was going to ask you if you knew had any familiarity with that, but from what I've understood, from what other people have told me about the Kirby stuff, it's that it's because Kirby's, he was a great idea man. Obviously brilliant artist, and he had a lot of these kind of high concept stuff, but he wasn't so good as a writer when you got down to the actual character type stuff. That's the kind of stuff where he wasn't so good at. So his Eternal stuff, a lot of people that I've talked to who have read it have just been kind of like, it looks nice, but that's really about all there is to it.
Yeah, and I feel like the Gaiman and the Gillen run is more like, the Gaiman run is very, when I was reading it, and I don't know if you had the same reaction, I was very like, this is a Gaiman book first and an Eternals book second. Like there's so many like Gaiman-esque tropes happening in there.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think those are characters and the story fits well with the kind of thing that Gaiman does. The Gillen run, there's also a lot of Gillenisms in there, but I feel like he does he's doing a better job of like writing the characters. It's an Eternals book first and a Gillen book second.
Okay. So he's made you more into so you're following it more because of Gillen specifically, or has he started to make you a fan of those characters as well?
Both.
Okay.
both. Like I'm interested in them in a way during this run in a way that I have not been in the past. And there's a massive spoiler at the end of the first arc that I won't reveal. That sort of paints them in a very different light than we've ever known before.
Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about this movie. Now, this is one of those films that was kind of a swing for the fences for Marvel, because kind of like Guardians of the Galaxy, because that was also a property that, you know, wasn't really well known. You could also put Shang-Chi in that category too, you know, character that a lot of people outside of the comics audiences didn't know about.
And even comics audiences, I would venture, probably not super familiar.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Guardians maybe a little bit more, but still but Shang-Chi and the Eternals, unless you're like real hardcore Marvel fan, you'd be forgiven for not really hearing about these characters before. You know, like I said, I've read tons of Marvel stuff, and the Eternals book is the first time I've really kind of read the Eternals on their own, not as part of them appearing somewhere else. So it was a gamble for them to say that we're going to do a movie about the Eternals, that, you know, this comic book that nobody's ever heard of, and introduce this new team that's been in the background the whole time. So what were some of your opinions after the first time you saw this movie?
I think swing for the fences is an apt description, but I think unfortunately they failed because I feel like this movie has this conflicting mission statement where on the one hand, like, they're trying to introduce all of these cool, interesting concepts that is like, as far as the movies are concerned, like we've never seen before. But at the same time, they're also trying to package it as a very conventional superhero movie in like sort of the Avengers like mold, right? Like you see that when you first introduce them, they're like, you know, having these big fighting action scenes. There's like these dramatic poses, they're quipping, and they're basically the Avengers, but like in ancient Babylon or what have you, which I think it was the wrong tack to take with these characters. Like, if anything, I wanted them to go even weirder and more unconventional, because then I think I messaged you like a couple of those panels from the Game and Run where like even they say, right, like we're not superheroes. But the movie, I think, was very much concerned with packaging them as such. And for me, that did not work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the movie works best when it kind of taps into those, when it takes them out of that realm. Like, and I think this movie would have been better served if they had actually gone with the Gaiman approach, where he had them kind of like amnesiac and start off with that and trying to make it more of a mystery and try to piece them together. I think that would have worked. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries.
Yeah, I think it would have worked a lot better if they had gone with that approach, because it feels like, because then you raise all these questions, which they actually, to their credit, they actually do address in the movie about like, well, how come you guys weren't around when, you know, Thanos was blinking half the population out of existence? And it's a really good point. And even though they say, well, you know, they told us not to get involved unless deviants are involved. I mean, at that point, after all this time that you know, spent living in the world, you'd think you'd, you know, kind of say like, well, you know, maybe we should get involved this time. So that excuse doesn't work so well. But if if you had gone with the Gaiman story, it would have made a whole lot more sense.
And what really was disconnecting from, like, as far as like, translating them from the comics, like this sense of like, they have such a, familiar, intimate, like relationship with humans. And when I think of the Eternals, they're very much like they're removed from us, because they're not humans, and they know that. Like they're these demigod figures that they wouldn't like. I know they did the whole Cersei Black Knight thing because it's a comics thing, and they're sort of tapping into that whole history with the Avengers, but like the relationship that they had with humans is not what I was expecting it would be.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by that as well. Them being revered as gods and all that made total sense, but it was weird to see, like, you know, Cersei going out among them and like helping them plant crops and all that, and then like dancing with them, and you know, Sprite telling them stories with her powers. That all of that seemed really kind of. It was also, even though I don't know much about the Eternals, it was kind of divorced from what I think the original idea behind it was, because Kirby was very much influenced by stuff like Chariots of the Gods and the whole kind of idea about, you know, the gods and goddesses of ancient cultures being actual aliens. And he was very much taking that inspiration from that when he did this, when he created this in the first place. And I think the movie would have been better served if it had kind of stuck with that, because I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to establish that they've got this affinity for humans, and that's why they decide to rebel against Ereshkigal. And that makes sense, but I think you could have accomplished that same thing by going with the game and stuff again, and having them be amnesiac and living among the humans and not knowing they're the Eternals until something awakens them.
Yeah, I think that approach would have made more sense to me as far as maybe providing narrative for, like, you know, why should you care for these peons, like these humans as much as you do, right? Because also, like, if you're self-aware immortal, and I was thinking about this, like in Phaistos' case, for example, like he's been around for a long time, and I would imagine like they would understand the cost of like having a relationship with a human who's gonna die, and like I don't like, you know, it's a blink of an eye to you if you've been around for thousands of years, and like, why would you do that again? Like willingly, in a very mentally balanced way. And so, like, I think the movie sort of like the movie asks a lot of interesting questions that it then sort of immediately hand waves away.
Right. I think Phaistos is a good example of that, because there's that great scene when he's standing at the ruins of Hiroshima in 1945, and you know, there's this whole thing about him being like done with humans, and you know, and his technology being responsible, but then he's living in suburban Chicago with humans, and and I get what they're trying to say. It's like, well, now I use my hands just to fix my son's bike, and I get what you're trying to say with that, but there's a jump there that's not quite making the landing.
Can we talk about Druig for a second? Because he was my favorite. Like he's like the POV character who tells, or at least as this particular audience member, like he's the one who's like, he said all the things that I was thinking, and I absolutely appreciate. And I just love the caustic character that's sort of like makes the other characters uncomfortable by like, and you know this from our other podcast, by like telling things they need to hear but maybe don't want to hear. So I really appreciated his character.
One of the things about Druig that kept throwing me off ever since I saw the trailers to this movie is, and this is just my thing, but appearance wise, he reminds me so much of what's his name, who plays Flash in the Justice League movies.
Ezra Miller?
It's kind of. He's got kind of like something about like his
hairstyle. I can see it.
And it kept throwing me off the entire time, because I'm looking at him. I'm like, I know this is not Ezra Miller, but it makes me think of Ezra Miller so much.
I can see it. I can see the resemblance.
That was really throwing me off when I was watching the movie. Both times, I keep thinking, I'm like, you're not Ezra Miller. Why did I?
There's another speedster. He's not Ezra Miller.
There is another speedster in there too.
Yes. Yes.
Now, for my part, I thought Cersei was my favorite of the characters. I thought Gemma Chan anytime you have Gemma Chan in a movie, it's always good to see her. And I thought she did a great job of making that character really, really likable, because if you know the character from some of her other appearances, like from her time in the Avengers, she's kind of a hard character to like. And I thought they did a really good job with her. And because, you know, if you had read the Gathering story arc, that was kind of her big thing in the Avengers.
Went insane, right? If I recall correctly.
She went insane. It was the Mad Weary thing. And then Black Knight kind of got tricked into being her Gan Josin and all that kind of stuff. And there was this whole love triangle between her and Black Knight and Crystal, who was also
that's right,
the Quicksilver at the time too. So it was like this love square type of thing. And not the best story arc that the Avengers have done before, but it was interesting, and it was kind of cool to see it. To see those characters appear in a different form here, and I found myself really thinking, like, you know what, I want to see her now end up in the Avengers, and I want to see like more of Kit Harington's Black Knight in the Avengers as well going forward.
Well, and I think she's easy to like because she's the only character I think that had any substantial arc.
Yeah.
In this entire, like, she's the only one who did, like, she started the movie as one thing, but she ends up in a different place, and I think she may be the only one from the cast that had any kind of substantial development.
Yeah, I mean,
which is hard to do when you have a cast of like what, 9
right
characters.
That's another thing, is this movie, it kind of feels like it's more of the X-Men style of movies than the Avengers style of movies, if you know what I mean. Because in the X-Men movies, it was much more focused on, 2 or 3 main characters. So it's like, you get the focus on Xavier, Wolverine, and Magneto. Whereas here, pretty much all the focus is on Cersei, as opposed to the Avengers movies, which tend to be a little bit more well-rounded in terms of their characterization.
Well, and they I mean, because they also get other movies to do that
too, yeah.
So
even so, like the characters who don't have their other movies in the Avengers films, like Black Widow, or I mean, I know Hulk had 1 movie before, but but a lot of people didn't even realize that. Or Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, Vision, all of them, they get quite a lot of development in those movies in comparison to the development that the Eternals get in this movie.
Can we talk about Karim for a second? That's his name, right?
Oh yeah, the valet.
Yes. What did you think of?
I thought he was it's weird because I get the feeling they're trying to go for like this comic relief type character, and he does that in a few scenes. But after a certain point, it just kind of feels like, why is this guy still here?
I get like I thought they were trying to okay, so here's this POV character, right? Like he's the stand-in for the audience, but he annoyed me so much. He annoyed me so much. Like, and it may be because the particular POV that he was bringing to the story may be different from my own point of view. But I'm just like, dude, there's all this crazy stuff happening. The world is gonna end. How are you this calm? How is this just normal for you?
He gets a few good lines, I will say that. Like, I did like the scene at the beginning when Kingo introduces him, and he's like, he thought I was a vampire at first, and he tried to stake me.
Oh, and did you just love how they all seem committed to like telling everybody who they are? Sir, like,
yeah,
like whatever. Kingo, like, okay, I'll just tell you, whatever.
That was kind of the weird thing, especially at the beginning when the Deviant first attacks, and because they've been leading up the whole Cersei and Dane situation. You get the sense that she hasn't told him anything about herself, but then the Deviant attacks, and she's like, it's a Deviant, and he says, well, I thought you killed them all, and then later she says, I'm an Eternal, and it's like, so wait, did you tell him? What did you tell him? What didn't you tell him? It's a really weird middle ground here.
No, but I think what happened is Sprite told him, but then I guess he thought like, oh, it's just Sprite telling stories, and then the Deviant shows up, which I guess verifies like everything that Sprite told him before. But everyone in this movie is super well adjusted. Like she just lays out this massive revelation. Like, by the way, I'm thousands of years old and I can do these things, and I've had this ex who's also kind of like me, by the way. Anyway, how are you taking all this, Dane? Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. Turn me into a giraffe. Ha ha ha.
I actually did kind of like his reaction to all of this, just because they live in a world where
that's
the
true.
Avengers had been a thing for like over 10 years now, and they just had this situation where half the population was disappeared by magic rocks for 5 years and then just magically brought back. So I did kind of like that, they're more, because that's one of the things that kind of annoys me when you have these situations in comics when they're like, oh, how can aliens exist and all this? I'm like, motherfucker, you've got like, Asgardians flying around down Fifth Avenue.
There's been aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it always kind of irritates me when they have those kind of surprises in those kind of surprise reactions in the comics and even in other movies. So I did find it a little refreshing that they didn't go down that route in this movie.
I guess maybe it's not so much like that narrative bit, but more like for me, like the quippiness of it. There wasn't a lot of distinction between how they talked in the past versus how they talk now.
Yeah.
That may just be being nitpicky, but like I feel like in the past they would talk like contemporary people.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
There's no difference between like what their language is in the present versus their language thousands of years ago, which I suppose you could just explain away by like the Star Trek universal translator theory. I suppose like they don't really sound like that. It's just being translated for your contemporary ears.
Right. But no, that is a good point too. And I did think that was it didn't quite jump out to me as much when I was watching the movie, but it's a good point to make, I think. And I think one of the things about this movie is that it feels like it's half of a Marvel movie and half of a DC movie in its execution. And it feels like it doesn't really know which one it wants to be. Like when you say when it's dealing with a lot of this, like a lot of the visuals, a lot of the kind of heavier themes seem much more suited to what the stuff that DC is doing. Whereas then you contrast it with the kind of quippiness. And I feel like there was a lot more interference in this movie than there was in some others.
Yes, because I feel like it's trying to burst out and like do all of these weird, unconventional things that they've never done before. But then I feel like Chloe Zhang got all these notes about like, no, like we got to sell action figures. Like we really have to sell them as like superheroes in this kind of vein.
Right? Yeah. And I think part of the problem is just, and this goes back to my thing with the comics too, is that the Eternals have never really been strong enough as a concept to kind of carry them into their own series, in my opinion. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing here with this movie, where you get a lot of interesting ideas, but the characters aren't really interesting enough to make me care about it as much. And I feel like the Eternals work much better when they're not the focus. When I like the backstory of them and the whole thing with the Celestials, but it feels like it works better with them not as the main characters, but with them like integrated into the larger Marvel universe, I think. I'm not sure if you disagree or how you feel about that.
I think there's a way. I mean, certainly the current Gillen run makes them a lot more interesting because of that thing I can't spoil. So you're just gonna have to read it yourself. But I think there's a way to make them interesting, and I think there's a way that the movie could have made them more interesting by not being so committed to like making them into another iteration of the Avengers, because that is not what they are.
Well, I think that's one of the strengths that Marvel's had with most of their superhero teams is that they all have like kind of like a set lane that they occupy, right? So it's, you've had the Avengers, which is, the big league superheroes. The Fantastic Four, they're a family, and they're a team of explorers. The X-Men is a school, and the Defenders are like, the weird kids that nobody wants to hang out with. And like all these different groups they have kind of this shtick, this little thing that gives them a reason for being. And the Eternals being this ancient group and all that, that's kind of their shtick. And when you try to make them a team of superheroes and you try to make them just like the Avengers, it doesn't work. And it just makes people are watching it just like, you know what? Yeah, but instead of having, Cersei and Kingo, we could have had, Captain Marvel and Doctor Strange.
Yeah, it made it a little bit tonally dissonant to me, and made me crave more like explorations of like some of the interesting implications of this movie. Like, for example, well, I suppose the layman in the MCU won't know, but like we're all basically like germs on this planet. We're just here to like incubate this baby, and like what are the sort of implications of that for people? Like it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that originally comes from the Earth X comics, doesn't it? The idea of this.
Right.
Okay.
Which I am. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I'm not sure if they've incorporated that into the main universe, Eternals comics at all.
I don't believe so. There was a celestial at the center of the planet. I don't recall the details, but like some in Jason Aaron's current Avengers run, like
right, yeah,
the concept he introduced. But I don't think they've introduced the notion of celestials using planets as incubators in the main Marvel in the 616.
Okay,
but that is one thing I really appreciated about the movie is they went full on Earth X. Like,
yeah,
I didn't think they would go there, but they did. So that was cool.
That was one of the things that surprised me. I wasn't expecting them to go full Earth X with that. And so I did like that addition there to add in the Earth X stuff. And I thought it gives the Eternals something to do, basically. So I did like that aspect of it. So bringing in the Earth X stuff and the Celestial stuff, that was cool. And then the way that Tiamat is killed at the end, with being kind of frozen in the earth like that, it did remind me of Aaron's Avengers and how their headquarters is basically this dead Celestial. So it does make me wonder if they're going to revisit that in future Avengers movies.
Yeah, like rewatching it, I kept thinking like, who's gonna live there now? And that island he came out of looks like a certain island in the comic where mutants live or something. Not that we want to go down that speculative route or anything.
But I do want to talk about some of the other characters. Like, so even though it wasn't as compelling to me, like I said, I did like Cersei. I like Kingo. I thought Kumail Nanjiani did a really good job in his portrayal of the character. And I was surprised, like, as I'd seen like the stories about him like getting buff, and as I'm watching him in like the Bollywood scene, I'm just like, man, he really did buff up for that role.
Yeah, but also I was like, if you did that much work, I didn't even see one shirtless scene. So,
yeah,
like you could have like done more. But I knew you worked hard. You could have gotten more mileage out of that. But yeah, maybe
it's weird.
Maybe it's just the outfit. Like they have to do that to fit in those things. It's one possibility because I don't know if I've seen them live in like museums and conventions, and they're like super tight and small. I mean, of course they would be, but like if you see them in person, I'm like, how could Kate Blanchett fit in that? That is a children's jumpsuit.
But yeah, it is weird because I remember them doing all this story. I'm like, oh, so we'll probably see Kumail Nanjiani having at least one shirtless scene in the movie, but we only ever see his arms. So you could have stayed a few hours at the gym and just worked on the arms.
Just the arms,
have to worry about it.
Yeah. Though I'm sure everyone is contractually obligated to do all that. Though
it seems like it these days. Yeah. And were there any characters that kind of jumped out for you in the movie?
Well, we mentioned Druig, who's I think my favorite. Ajak though felt very. I mean, what did you think about Ajak? I felt like I think we could have given Salma Hayek more to do, but it felt like she was really more just a plot device to get the narrative going in the movie and to sort of provide like the backdrop of the murder mystery.
Yeah. I was kind of disappointed because what we see of her in the movie I liked. And I did wish we would have gotten to see more of her. Same also with Angelina Jolie as Thena.
Yes.
I mean, we did get more of her than we expected because originally that had just been intended to be a cameo. So we did get more of her. Yeah.
I did not know that.
So we did get more of her than we expected in the movie, which I liked. But one of the things too, like I couldn't understand why Angelina Jolie was using an accent in the movie.
Was there an accent?
Yeah, that wasn't her regular voice. So she's putting on a bit of an accent. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why, because so many of the characters, they're just the actors are just using their regular, native accents. Like, you've got Richard Madden, who's got like this kind of Scottish accent, Gemma Chan speaking with an English accent, Sprite, Phaistos, they're speaking with, just regular standard American accent. So I couldn't understand why Angelina Jolie decides, I'm going to go with this pseudo British accent. Like, I couldn't really define it.
Well, apparently it's so subtle, I did not even notice.
I think it's because I'd recently rewatched Gone in 60 Seconds, and so I had her voice very much front of mind when I rewatched the movie, and I'm just like, that is not her regular voice.
Gilgamesh felt like, it's sort of like this X-Men approach that you were talking about earlier, where it's really hard to like find or notice anything super compelling about any of the other characters besides like the ones that they focus on. Like I feel like all of them have like they have one or two things to do in the movie, and then they do them, and then that's it.
Gilgamesh is a good point, because that was a character that I wish we had gotten to see more of, because I liked what we saw of him, but it's just, it's not enough. And I did also like the little conversations they had that tie it to the rest of the Marvel universe, like when they're talking about hanging out with Odin and Thor chasing around. As a little kid and all that. I did like that kind of stuff, and it makes sense. I did wish we would have gotten to see a little bit more of that kind of stuff in it, but but I don't know. I don't think they'll be getting a sequel out of this,
which is unfortunate. I think like I could go with another. I could maybe go for another one, but hopefully, assuming that like they commit to sort of a more weird or unconventional take on it. But I worry you may be right, though.
Well, they did solve the problem of how are they going to keep Sprite young, because that actress is definitely going to grow up. And so they did solve that problem, which I was wondering as we're watching the movie. I'm like, something's got to happen to Sprite by the end of this movie. Like either she's going to die or something, because there's no way that they can have her stay ageless for the sequel if they do a sequel. So it was kind of nice to see them kind of solve that problem. Also, what else did I get? Oh, some of the casting choices were interesting too, because they had done a lot of flipping from the characters in the comics, because most of these characters are just white dudes in the comics. Like Makari's a white dude, but here he becomes a deaf black woman. Ajax was a guy in the comics, and ends up becoming Salma Hayek. Athena was the same basically. But they've done a lot of Phaistos. I'm not sure. I didn't see him in the game where I'm at of the game and run, so I'm not sure what he was like in the comics. But
is he in there? I don't recall. I think he is.
Yeah. Well, even Sprite, right? Sprite was a boy in the comics, and this she's a girl. So they've done a lot of switching about that. What do you think about that? Because I thought it was kind of cool, and it gave it made I did like the casting in this. I thought it was nice to see a casting that was a little bit more representative of humanity as a whole, as opposed to just white guys all over the place.
I may be the wrong person to ask, because I'm very biased towards like, you know what, race blind casting. Let's do it. Let's go for it. Like, so I didn't have a problem with that. I thought it was really great. It made things more interesting as far as I'm concerned. And I don't, and it to me, so to me, like these kinds of choices don't really have to be justified as far as I'm concerned. But even in the case of these characters, I think there's even more of a case to be made about like this being okay, because like these are cosmic godlike characters. They probably don't really give a crap about earthbound notions of gender. So like, who cares? And also it's cool, like if you read the Gillen run, he actually works that in.
Oh, okay.
Where he mentions like, because they resurrect every so often, and then there's a cool line there, I think in issue 2, where he inserts like, oh yeah, every so often we just change genders because whatever, we're bored, so it's a thing.
Yeah, which makes sense. And you look at some of these gods and goddesses, and they've got to. There's precedent for doing that in the old old myths too. So, so it is a cool thing to do. And like you said, because they're these ancient gods and goddesses, you're not restrained to different socio-political concerns. Like, one of the arguments, my late co-host used to make is that you can have a black Batman, but you can't really have a black Bruce Wayne because there's so much about the character and inherited wealth and all that in that.
Although excuse me, there is a black Batman running around right now.
Well, yeah, like you said, you can have a black Batman, but a black Bruce Wayne is a different story because Bruce Wayne's all about inherited wealth and in America. So it's harder to do with that character. And other characters you can obviously switch fairly easily. Like Nick Fury doesn't have any connection necessarily to being black or white. You could easily make him either one.
I mean, although I don't know, like I've had discussions about like, can we have a black Emma Frost and an African American Emma Frost? And I'm like, I think absolutely you can. But anyway, and the other thing too is like in the movie they also established that like these aren't the only set of Eternals that get sent out to like different planets and to do the Celestials' bidding, and so I mean it's always possible that there are different iterations of these characters, and they could be sending out like different versions of Ajax. So you could have like a Salma Hayek Ajax, or maybe there's another kind of Ajax running around somewhere else.
Yeah, that was a pretty creepy scene where we see Cersei looking at like all the other
versions of themselves.
Yeah. And what do you think about the decision to basically make Icarus the villain of the movie?
Okay, I your mileage may vary, but I seem to be on this like I figure out the whodunit in the first 5 minutes of things. I'm like, this reveal is not surprising to me because he looked creepy the first time he showed up. Like something is not right with this person. So yeah, it was fine. Like the twist wasn't so twisty to me. Although maybe shifting gears a little bit, they did not have any chemistry. I'm sorry. Like that romance is not compelling to me at all.
Which it works in the modern day because they've been separated, but it doesn't work in the flashbacks.
No, it doesn't. I'm like, I'm not buying this meet cute is not so cute.
Like when he tells her like you're beautiful and all that, I'm just kind of like, that feels so rehearsed right now. Yeah.
No, in that scene where he made like some like foodie whatever thing, and then I'm gonna have to learn their stuff, I guess, if I'm gonna spend time with you. I'm like, Cersei, I just don't see it, but I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there were slim pickings in the Eternals for you.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, he did okay with what he was given, but in general, I wasn't really that impressed with Icarus as a character. Just way too much stoicism. And it did make you realize why she ends up going for Dane in the first place, because he's like the complete opposite of what Icarus is. So like after being with this guy for 5,000 years, it makes sense why you'd want to go with someone who's a little bit more laid back.
Although like she waited for him though, like I think she said that, but yeah.
Well, speaking of, because I think he was probably the biggest casting news, at least in the circles I ran in, because he was probably the character that most Marvel fans were familiar with, was Kit Harington as Dane Whitman. What do you think of that casting choice and his character in the movie?
It worked for me. I think I need to see more, and I maybe need to see him as like donning the helmet and wielding the sword, which now that I think about it, he has a lot of experience wielding swords and such to make a final decision. But I think he did a good job in here, just to sort of being like the charming earthbound human boyfriend to the Eternal.
Yeah, and I like the references they threw in, like the fact about his uncle and him being estranged from his uncle because, his uncle is the first Black Knight in the comic who appeared in the comics, and he was a criminal. So I did like that little callback. I did like that he had the ebony blade at the end, and how they had the Black Knight symbol in the ring as his family crest. that she gives him. So all of that, I thought it was cool to see those little callbacks. I'm just like, that's something I recognize in a movie based on characters that I have no familiarity with.
And although I see there's maybe another reason for a sequel is I just want to see what the plan is to try to locate your cosmic girlfriend with a sword thing. Like I want to see what the plan is there.
Yeah. Now for me, actually, I think the most interesting scenes in this were actually the mid and post credit scenes. So we had we have Star Fox pop up at the end. What do you think of that and the casting of Harry Styles?
So I mean the concept of like he's the most beautiful man ever is already dubious from the start, and so again your mileage would vary with Harry Styles, but I think he did good with the sort of part of the story that he had to play, and I think he embodied the character well, and I was really, I mean the movie we did, I think we threw a lot of criticism at it, but I think one of the things I enjoyed a lot was just when I thought they couldn't get deeper with the cuts, they keep one upping themselves and sort of paying off like, oh, I'm Thanos' brother. I'm like, oh, okay, we're doing that, and what is that going to mean for all the movies going forward?
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting choice too, because they had no mention of Thanos being an Eternal or anything like that. And no
having a family,
or having a family, right? Having a larger family. So you get the sense that everybody on Titan was just like him. So having him tie him into the Eternals actually does make a lot of sense then that way, because he had that situation in the comics too, where you've got this purple, wrinkly chin guy as like the only, where the rest of his family are all white people.
Right, and pretty, and for the most part human looking, which is a nice bit of comic accuracy.
And also I loved seeing Patton Oswalt as Pip the Troll. I thought that was a great piece of casting.
Was that Patton Oswalt?
That was Patton Oswalt, yeah.
Oh my god, okay. But just his voice, right? Like was that him?
I think he did the motion capture. I think it was a mix. I think he definitely did motion capture for it, because I definitely recognized his face.
All right. And you can tell, and he's teleporting, which I thought he could only do because he had the space gem, but maybe that's not the case.
That's a good point. Yeah. Or maybe maybe they had raided the Time Variance Authority from Loki.
Indeed.
I don't know, but that's a good point. Yeah, I wonder how they're gonna handle that. Well, there's a lot of questions about how they're going to handle, because they had introduced the Infinity Stones before introducing some of the characters that were connected to them. Like Adam Warlock's going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, but the Soul Gem's long gone now, so it's going to be interesting to see how they use that.
Well, I mean, I'm just totally guessing, but I mean, there were Infinity Stones, but maybe there's Infinity Gems as well.
Well, and also the gems, they're destroyed, but they're just like containers, so the energy still exists somehow. So it'll be curious to see what they do with that kind of stuff. Also the post-credit scene with Dane and the Ebony Blade. I really like the way the little glimpse we get of the Ebony Blade and how it's like moving as he reaches out for it. I thought that was a really cool touch. And then we get a little surprise cameo voice at the end.
Indeed.
Did you pick up on who that was?
Yeah, it's Mahershala Ali.
Yes. Yeah. So
that's Blade.
So and it's funny because
there's another Blade in the scene. So by the way,
and I was watching with the subtitles, and it just says "mysterious man."
Oh. So I mean, I guess they'll be hunting vampires together.
I guess so. Yeah.
I guess perhaps.
Or some sort of Midnight Suns type thing, or something like that. So, which will be cool. Like I love that concept, and so it'd be really cool to see what they do with Blade going forward. Hopefully not make him an Avenger, because though I like Aaron's run, I don't think Blade should be an Avenger.
I know. I mean, I guess we can go in a little bit of tangent. I feel like ever since Bendis, they've had this like everyone's an Avenger.
Yeah,
everyone can be an Avenger. I'm like, okay, all right.
That's one of the things I really disliked about Bendis's run, is just how it's like, hey, everybody's an Avenger now. I'm like, come on. It used to mean something.
Oh.
So, but that's a bit of a digression there.
Did you notice and I don't know what kind of legal wrangling they had to do, but apparently Batman and Superman exist in the MCU.
Yeah, well, they're, or at least as fictional characters.
Right.
I thought that was cute, and it does make sense because they have all these references to, them influencing the ancient gods and goddesses, and then so it does make sense that someone like Icarus could be the inspiration for Superman. So I thought that was a cool little nod, and also just calling him, just the mention of what's his name being like Alfred. Yeah, it was cute. Those little moments were, and those little moments when they're interacting were when I found them the most interesting. And it's the larger story just didn't really interest me as much as the individual characters maybe did. And I wish we would have seen more of them. Okay, Pat, anything else you wanted to mention about Eternals?
I guess we can conclude with I think it's worth a view from folks, especially if you are an MCU fan. I don't think it deserved all the hate that it got, and certainly I don't think it's not the worst Marvel movie. To me, that distinction still belongs to the Dark World.
For me, it's still Iron Man 3.
Okay. For me, it's still the Dark World. But it's certainly a lot better than that. I just think that there was a lot of conflicting impulses in this movie and a lot of like different tonal mismatches, and which may be a product of perhaps the director and the writers wanting to tell one story and getting a lot of notes from the studio who perhaps wanted a different kind of movie.
Yeah, I agree with that for the most part as well. One other thing I want to mention too is it is a beautiful movie. Like I will say that.
Right, yes.
I mean
agreed. Yes.
And it I feel bad for Chloe Zhao because she deserved a better movie than this. Hopefully she gets to do more stuff with Marvel despite this, because it does look amazing. And also like I love how they do the Eternals and all their powers are consistent with each other. They've all got those like kind of like, outline type effects to them. I did like that they had all linked them together that way and showed them that they're all consistent in that way.
Yeah, I just want to echo that too. Like it's so just aesthetically wonderful. Everything on the screen looks pretty. Like Chloe Zhang has a good eye, obviously. The scale of it, the visuals. I particularly liked all of the designs when she goes to the World Forge. It's just, I mean, it's CGI, but it's very beautiful. And gorgeous.
Well, I think they did a good job of capturing the Kirby aesthetic without being slaves to it. So I thought they did a really good job of that. Although I gotta admit, I was kind of hoping for a little bit of Kirby crackle.
A little bit of crackle, yeah.
A little bit of Kirby crackle would have been nice, but other than that.
No, but speaking of the World Forge, I just remember this rewatching the movie yesterday. I don't know if you've read the Al Ewing run of, I'm not sure what it's his run on the Inhumans, but they actually visit the World Forge in that title.
Oh, okay. No, I haven't read Inhumans.
Yeah, I'm like, I thought that was a pretty cool callback reference to that.
Inhumans is another one like the Eternals that I was never really able to get into them. So just Inhumans and Eternals, those are like the two Marvel properties that just never really held any interest for me.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I do think along with the Eternals, the Inhumans are most interesting to me when they're playing with other people.
Yeah, I think so.
Not so much just by themselves.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that about ends our conversation for Eternals. So Pat, you want to tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, I have a Tumblr called Perfect Fabricated Killing Machine that you can check out, particularly if you're after more Emma Frost content in your life. Also, like we mentioned earlier, I'm on another podcast with a few other friends called Krakoan Exports. So check us out if you want to learn more or are curious about the, for us, current Hickman era, but I guess the Krakoan era in general.
Yep. And also you can listen to both Pat and myself and our other co-host Oscar on E for Evolution, examining Grant Morrison's X-Men. This show, as always, superherocinephiles.com is the website, Super Cinema Pod on both Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you like us. Make sure you rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you get your podcasts. And that about does it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.